Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell a friend and give it a mention on your favorite social media platforms. Also, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It might just inspire Apple to promote us a little. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I'm off to the FDA for a day trip on Monday, so this episode's going up a little early. My last two southbound Acela trips led to conversations with Lewis Black and Spike Lee, so we'll see who shows up in the first class car this time. And lest you think I'm some big high roller, I have upgrade tickets out the wazoo because of all the regular travel I do on Amtrak, so I'm upgrading to first class free because I'm a cheap Jew. Anyway, this week's guest, the illustrator and artist Joe Ciardiello. This is Joe's second appearance. When he was on the show almost 2 years ago, he was deeply immersed in a project that he called Spaghetti Journal. And that project is now out as a book from Fantagraphics Underground called A Fistful of Drawings. It's billed as a graphic journal, and it weaves together the Italian-American experience, Joe's childhood, the spaghetti Western genre, mid-century America, the importance of pop culture here and in Italy. And it's all done through Joe's absolutely masterful illustrations and his text, which is both, well, I'll tell you about it in a minute. I saw some of the pages in progress when we recorded, and then an exhibition of them in the fall of 2017, but nothing prepared me for seeing it all come together in this book. Joe's pen and ink and watercolors, he's a master. He's been an illustrator, professional freelance illustrator since I was 3 years old. And he captures all of these historical and cultural and pop cultural figures and works text into the illustrations, as well as these sort of standalone segments that all help to sort of bring this stuff into the context of the boy who grew up on Staten Island, raised on Westerns and cowboy and Indian stories, and the man he'd become as an artist and illustrator. And it's that text, like I say, the explication that's woven into the illustrations and the standalone parts, all of which are handwritten, not typeset, that helps make this like just an utterly unique experience of storytelling. Fistful of Drawings, it blew me away. And I'm hoping that Joe gets to continue working in this sort of hybrid form where it's not a comic, it's not just a series of drawings, a graphic journal, as again, the book is called. And he gets to tackle some of the other influences that have shaped his life, because he does a tremendous amount of research, but doesn't dump information on you. He really weaves it all together so beautifully. Fistful of Drawings, it's just breathtaking in terms of scope and in personal depth, and the drawings are just unmatched in their beauty. go order it. Get it from fantagraphics.com or wherever you get really good books. A Fistful of Drawings by Joe Ciardiello. And if you're listening to this the week the episode comes out, and you're in the New York area, you might want to come to the Society of Illustrators on February 28th, 2019, for you time travelers, and see Joe get interviewed by the illustrator Steve Brodner. As Joe tells us during this conversation, Steve was a motive force in bringing Fistful of Drawings into existence. I think it's going to be an entertaining conversation. You can visit societyillustrators.org for more info on that event. The other thing I want to say is, I've talked about this in the past, how some of my guests, some of them I never see again. We never correspond. There's no communication. Joe has stayed in touch. He's reached out with ideas for other guests. He's been a friend, and you know how much I appreciate that. So a couple of other guests have come to me through Joe, including recently Deborah Feingold, Robert Andrew Parker, J.J. Settlemeyer, and then the ones who've come from J.J. It's all a big tree of people. But anyway, Joe has been an important person since we got to meet, an important person to the show and to me since we got to meet in 2017. Anyway, as caveats go, there is some truck noise, and that's about it. Here's Joe's bio. Joe Ciardiello was born and raised on Staten Island, New York, just a ferry ride to Manhattan, where he attended the High School of Art and Design and Parsons School of Design. A freelance illustrator since 1974, Joe has worked for most major magazines, newspapers, and book publishers, including Entertainment Weekly, The Nation, The New Yorker, The New York Times Book Review, and Rolling Stone. His drawings have been exhibited in galleries and museums throughout the country. Among his awards is the prestigious Hamilton King Award from the Society of Illustrators in 2016. Joe lives in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. His new book is A Fistful of Drawings. Oh, and the bio doesn't even mention Joe is also a jazz drummer, and he plays in a band that kind of does gigs at the Society of Illustrators and other places. Anyway, now the 2019 Virtual Memories conversation with Joe Ciardiello. A Fistful of Drawings is out. When we last talked about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, you were looking for a publisher. How'd it come together? And tell us about the book and what it entails.
I started making a list of some publishers that I'd want to approach that I thought might be a good fit. And Fantagraphics was at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. And I knew that a couple of friends of mine, like John Cuneo and Steve Brodner, had already had books published by them. So I first approached Monty Beauchamp, who's in Chicago, and he's...
who I think still has the most wonderful name in comics.
Yeah. And although he's not a publisher per se, but he gave me some good pointers and encouraged me to start a blog first to kind of build up a following, and you know, he gave me a few leads. But it wasn't until I was at Mocha Fest a couple of years ago, and Gary Groth was there at the Fantagraphics table, and Steve Brodner, as generous as Steve always is, dragged me over in the midst of all the madness of Mocha Fest, and introduced me to Gary, and across a table of books with people all around buying books and milling around and looking through things, and the din of the crowd, Steve is now pitching my book to Gary, and I'm just standing kind of behind him, like I'm the little kid here, and my dad is pitching this book for me, and I'm I was part mortified, very embarrassed. And then I sort of picked it up and pursued it a little more with Gary, but that was really not the place for that kind of thing. But needless to say, he seemed interested, and told me to follow up with him. So we had some back and forth, which went on for a little while because he wasn't sure there was a market for the book, and And of course, I wasn't sure either, but I'm still not sure. But
I'm planning on buying a dozen copies to give to people. So,
well, there you go.
There's some market.
Yeah, so we kind of went back and forth for a while, and he said he really wanted to see it finished before he could make a decision. And at that point, I was maybe a little less than 2/3 of the way done with the book. So it kind of gave me the kick in the ass I needed to finish it. And I figured I'm going to finish this thing either way, whether he's going to publish it or not. At least I'll have it done and I can pitch it around, or I can self-publish it, which was, sort of my last resort. So I spent, several months just really getting the thing finished, put into a PDF, sent it to him, and he absolutely loved it. He didn't feel it was a mass market book, so he said, our underground, Fantagraphics Underground imprint, which is a more limited edition, and it's sort of geared toward artists' more personal statements, and he thought if I was agreeable to that, that would work. So, I was, and so now here we are.
How did you know it was finished? When did you have the shape of it?
Well,
ultimately, except the individual pages, but to know that you've shaped it into.
Well, my original thought was like a 120-page book. That was my original plan. So I had a lot more. I mean, this is 72 pages, and I have piles of notes, and I could be working on this thing for the rest of my life. And I thought I need to.
That
find
sounded
a
like
way.
where you were when we talked 2 years ago. That it was sort of open-ended, although you knew you needed to.
There are things I needed to cut out. Or to not include, because I knew I had to get it done. I gave myself a deadline, whatever it was at the time. I wanted it done by a certain time, and I needed to make it make sense as a book, whereas originally it was more a collection of drawings with a little bit of text, but basically, a collection of drawings, really no narrative, more like a stream of consciousness kind of thing. But as I realized this thing has to make sense as a book, I knew I had to write more. And not being a writer, that was kind of daunting to me, and I felt very insecure about that. What saved me was the fact that it's just all written in my hand, and I mean by hand. It's just.
You have like, 1 or 2 pages that are solely text, but in the hand-lettered.
Right, style. But most of it is text around drawings, either on as part of the drawing or around the drawing. And so I felt, well, these are my notes, more or less. This is this is sort of how I talk, and it's in my handwriting, and it's so no one's going to think that I'm an author here. This is just These are just my notations, like a journal, which was the whole idea of the thing, like a sketchbook or a journal. It's not a graphic novel. I don't know what really it is. I call it a graphic journal, and
that holds up.
I think it's probably going to be marketed more or less as a graphic novel, I guess, because there's no way else to kind of. Categorize this type of.
You got the Lone Ranger and Flash Gordon in there, so there's some sort of hero. I'm just kidding.
Superhero, yes. Yeah.
But were there writing models at all? Was there anyone who you said, you looked at for, some sort of template or inspiration for how you were?
Well, Myra Coleman's books actually were.
It makes sense.
Were inspiring to me. The way she incorporates her. Her handwritten text and her observations, and I did kind of consider her a model in that regard. But other than that, it was more like sketchbook journals.
Is it something that you want to keep up with? Do you feel the need to, or the desire to try to write more?
That's a good question. I certainly have enough material. Not that I've created it yet, but things that didn't make it into this book that, there's the thought of, well, possibly doing a sequel.
For a few drawings more. Yeah.
Well, that's actually Gary suggested that title. So I guess that's a possibility, but I'm already 65, and if this thing from the...
You can't say anything about that because Jules Feiffer. Jules started doing full-length graphic novels at 85 years old.
You're right.
So,
right.
There's always... And the enthusiasm he had when I sat down with him, he was working on the second of the three graphic novels. We finished up, and he's like, do you want to see some of my pages? And, took me over to the studio, and he's just showing us all of these, the pages, and it was amazing that he had that level of enthusiasm, instead of, you goddamn kid, get out of my house,
Yeah, no, that he's incredible, and that you're right. I mean, that is, that's someone to look up to as a role model in that regard.
Not that you should think of yourself at 90, but still,
Well, it could take me that long to do a sequel because it took fair amount of time to get this one.
And what was the toughest part of creating it? I mean, I know the research took a long time, but once you started making pages, were there things that held you up, or was it simply a function of balancing that with professional obligations?
Yeah, I mean, fitting it in around assignments, that was that could be a problem because I would put it away for weeks or even months at a time sometimes. So maybe not months, but a month, and then get back into it again. But I think once I knew there was a publisher that was interested and I had to finish it, it started to become a little more like an assignment, which I didn't like because the whole point of this was
the personal project.
Yeah, the project that I always wanted to do, where there are no restrictions and nobody's standing over my shoulder and nobody is giving me any art direction, and I had no deadline, and I can do what I want. Now, I do need the deadline for some motivation to get the thing finished. On the other hand, that the reality of, well, this thing has to be done now, and I don't have the luxury of maybe just playing around with these drawings and if this works out or not, maybe that didn't work out, and I'll do something else. Or I knew there were things I needed to get in that had to be in the book, and so I had to work at them, to make sure I got it done, and it became a little more like a job. So
this is the first personal project you've published?
Well, I did a book of blues musicians. I think 2011 maybe that came out, but that was a very limited. That was sort of an artist's book, so it was a limited limited edition, numbered, beautifully printed, letterpress printed by Strike 3 Press, and.
Were the pictures for that original for the book?
Yes.
Or were they, okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, a few of them I had done before, but for myself, drawings of musicians, which I've been doing for years, and would like, at some point, whether it's with Fantagraphics or whoever, I've always wanted to publish a book of my musicians because I have quite a few of them. And, but anyway,
but that sense of it becoming professional while still being a personal project was kind of weird for you.
Yeah, I mean this was the first book of mine, of my own, for a publisher, a commercial publisher. So there was that pressure of, well, this could possibly be a book, so I've got to do a good job here, and I have to have it make sense, complete it in a professional sort of way,
but also in a narrative way. I mean, it does tie together narratively, and I wonder about that challenge for you when you.
That was probably the biggest challenge because as I've said, I'm not a writer, and linking it all together. I mean, I had this loose narrative in my head all along that I knew how how I wanted it to flow, but I had to link it together with text, and that was a challenge. And some of that took longer than the drawings, because it's not something I'm comfortable doing, that I'm accustomed to doing. So that was probably the biggest challenge, was having the text tie the thing together.
How did the project evolve from when you started out just doing the research, and when you came across a spaghetti western book in the museum?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Well, because I listened to our episode right before we got together. What did you learn? How did it change for you from what you thought you were starting with to what it became?
Well, I guess the more I researched the project, the more things I started to learn myself, and I would think, oh, that'll be great for the book, and this will be great, and I didn't know that. Not thinking, I don't know if anybody else has the most remote interest in any of this, but it appealed to me, and I felt if I could make interesting drawings for myself that incorporate these things I'm learning, at least if it interests me, it might interest a few other people. But it's really more about, doing stuff that I like. Yeah. So the research, reading Sir Christopher Frayling, who is just an incredible authority on pop culture, specifically spaghetti westerns, and he did the biography of Sergio Leone, and he's done several books on Sergio Leone, and there's one coming out for the 50th anniversary of Once Upon a Time in the West that I'm looking forward to. Plus, there's several lectures of his on YouTube, and on the DVDs that I have, he does commentary, on the Leone ones, and so I learned a lot listening to him, and piqued my interest about things. And
did you contact him? Did you guys ever talk during the project?
He's British, and he lives in London, and
that's no excuse.
I'm not sure how to contact him, frankly, but I am thinking of sending him a copy of the book, because I did thank him in the acknowledgments.
You put me in the acknowledgments too. I was freaked out when I finished the book. I thought, oh my God, this is pretty distinguished company, and some schlub from New Jersey too.
Well, we did a podcast together.
That's true. I'm on the inner circle, I guess.
But yeah, he would be. I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah, I just didn't know if he was a resource at all once you started working, as if you had questions that you would, be able to zap to that stuff.
Yeah.
Just drew your own conclusions?
Yeah.
Why do you think Western culture, Old West culture, resonated in Italy? Going back to Puccini and everything else that all leads into the spaghetti westerns decades later.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure. I think I know that when Buffalo Bill, which figures prominently in this story, when he went over with the Wild West show, and not only Italy, of course, but throughout Europe, this was fascinating to Europeans, because they thought they were seeing real life portrayed. Native Americans and how Americans lived, and the Wild West, and the stagecoach, and all this kind of stuff with animals and buffalo, and they brought all these animals over there. This was all new to them, and I think they have this fascination with America and what America must be like in the 19th century. And it definitely starts there. Why it continued,
and why Italy?
Yeah, and why with Italians?
Yeah.
The movies had a lot to do with that. The popular culture. I mean, from what I know about Sergio Leone's life is he loved movies. He loved westerns. He loved John Ford movies. As a kid and as a young man. And during World War II, when American soldiers showed up in Rome, what he knew of Americans was what he saw in the movies. He was let down when he saw American soldiers because the heroic aspect was there, but he saw these guys for what they really were,
human beings,
and suddenly the mystique was broken. But his fascination with the films was always there, and his father was a filmmaker and made the first Italian Western silent movie, and his mother starred in it. And so
it's just family business. Then,
yeah. So as far as he's concerned, that fascination was there throughout his life. Of course, he changed he turned the whole genre on its head, and made it into something new and grittier and more violent, and really set the stage for everything else that followed. I mean, in this country as well. It really changed the way movies were made, westerns. I guess Sam Peckinpah, on this side of the ocean, did it, his way. But I don't think you would even have had the Wild Bunch if you hadn't first had A Fistful of Dollars and for a few dollars more. So, he was tremendous influence.
I was going to say, we can also try and send a copy to Clint Eastwood, but I'm not sure you need his endorsement at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about Clint.
Yeah.
He's
later years. You keep up with the Western genre at all? I know there've been
a
sort of resurgence.
I'm always excited about when I hear about a new. I mean, the Coen brothers.
I haven't watched it yet. Buster Scruggs.
Terrific. Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
And there was this series Godless that was on Netflix recently, which was fantastic with Jeff Daniels. Really a terrific miniseries, beautifully done. And again, the filmmaker was very influenced by Sergio Leone. I heard him doing an interview, and you hear that by so many people. I mean, Breaking Bad.
Vince Gilligan.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the Leone influence.
Certainly, especially in the use of landscape in that show. Yeah.
And I mean, I still westerns. Deadwood. I mean, Deadwood is my favorite TV series, and I'm so looking forward to the movie that's coming out, the Deadwood movie. And so yeah, I would love to see Martin Scorsese do a western. That's I don't know if he would ever will. Yeah. But he's, I mean, I quote him in my book saying, he always wanted to do a western, and the closest he came was Gangs of New York, which he calls an eastern. But again, even when he was filming Gangs of New York, which he filmed at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, and they created that whole set there, he said that he would show the crew. He'd have them watch Once Upon a Time in the West, the beginning of the movie specifically, just to get that feel and to get people inspired. So that Sergio Leone influence is just it seems to be pervasive, and
you also cite the Tarantino influence, but
that's
the smaller body of work.
That goes without saying. I mean, Tarantino, he considers The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly his favorite movie, and I'm sure his new film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, again, which even the title is an homage to Leone, and he has Leonardo DiCaprio playing a Western TV star in the late '60s. So,
Have you ever been interested in filmmaking? When we talked before, it was all illustration of various kinds when you were young, but did film ever strike you as
not as an option to pursue? I mean,
it's a different world, and it was a much more expensive, hobby if you were going to pursue it.
I mean, I would definitely be interested in that. But it's not anything I considered when I was younger.
I mean, Steven Soderbergh shows you can shoot a movie on an iPhone now, and you'll be just fine.
That's true.
You talk a little about just the way the book not only talks about the Italian, the Leone aspect with spaghetti westerns, but the Italian American aspect of Western culture, and sort of how you pursued that thread and sort of tie it into the
with Italian American actors in TV westerns and things like Robert Loggia and Iron Eyes Cody, the crying Indian from the
you say Indian in quotes, but
right. Who amazingly lived his life as a Native American. That's just amazing to me. He convinced himself that he was, I guess, and he married a Native American woman, and he was apparently accepted by the Native American community. But yeah, it's because I was such a kid of television. Grew up with television, literally, and loved westerns. So it was a logical, progression to find the connections. I would look things up because I there were certain things I was aware of, but then I wanted to find out, is there another connection? And I would, with Google, it's just so I would type things into searches and see if any Italians in westerns, and see what names came up and what I was familiar with, and I'd say, oh, of course, this, but some were new to me. I didn't know, I didn't know Victor Mature was Italian. And played an Indian, and so he's one of the ones that didn't make the.
I was going to ask what guys didn't make it into the book, but
Salminio. I mean, there's a few others, but
did it mean something to you though to see that Italian American experience reflected in film? I mean, when you're growing up, you wouldn't know that those were Italians.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, I knew Salminio was Italian, but. And I thought, well, he's playing an Indian, and I guess, it seemed odd, but not that uncommon.
We accepted a lot of that stuff that we shouldn't have accepted,
right.
but
right, that was so common.
We can go down a pretty bad rabbit hole with this stuff. We'll move all that aside. But as an Italian American, was there a sense for you of not any sort of redemption, but hey, these are guys who were getting these roles and
no, that didn't really enter my consciousness. As a young person, that didn't really.
Nowadays, you're just happy it was that instead of gangsters and mobsters and the stereotype roles.
That's true. That's true. But that it kind of connects. Well, I have the Al Capone connection in there, and his brother, but. There can be a logical extension from the Western to the gangster film. And I kind of touch on it a little bit, but that's, if I were to continue this story, that's an area to delve into because, not that I by no means want to glorify, the mafia or mobsters or that, that sort of stereotype for Italians. But the movies, I mean, if we're talking about the popular culture, the next popular genre in Italy after the spaghetti westerns faded out in the 70s was the gangster picture, the crime genre. Polizioteschi, I think. I've started researching this.
Of course, yeah. I can for a few dollars, for a few drugs more.
But these didn't really make it over here the way the Italian westerns did. Well, I mean, the Leone westerns made it big here, but so many of them never came over. But the crime genre, they were influenced in Italy by The Godfather and The French Connection and the Death Wish, Charles Bronson,
Yeah.
you know. Those movies had an impact in Italy, and so then they started churning out these low-budget, really violent, misogynistic, you know, really terrible movies with a lot of the stars that were in the Italian westerns, you know, like Franco Nero and lesser actors. They just moved into that genre, and even then some American actors as well, like Charles Bronson.
Because you had to class it up.
Oh, and the, Dirty Harry, of course, was also a big, you know, influence there. So that, you know, as here, the same thing happened here. I mean, the crime, gangster, mob movies became, you know, a big genre here, the action films, you know. But, you know, I see it all as an outgrowth of these Westerns. You know, and then there's even the Staten Island connection with me, which is also part of my book. Yeah. But, you know, because the Godfather scenes were filmed on Staten Island, the compound, the Corleone compound where the wedding was, and the house, you know, that house is there. And I went there during filming, you know, along that street, and they had all the old cars parked there, and the fiberglass wall, the stone wall, which was, you know, I was touching it, and I thought, oh, what is this, plastic? You know? I don't think they were shooting that day, so they kind of let me and a friend of mine, you know, just kind of walk around on the street, but we couldn't obviously get in behind the wall. But
so your Abe Vigoda is Tessio, not fish, right? That's because my Vigoda was always fish.
Well, and for me, it's both.
Okay.
Yeah, it's both. But yeah, so you know, aside from real-life mobsters living on Staten Island, which, you know, sadly was the case, but, you know, the pop culture, you know, was there as well. So, you know, this stuff was all around me, and so it seems like a logical extension.
Sounds like material for a second book. Not that I'm going to push you on it, but I can't wait to see it.
We'll see. We'll see.
Last question. It comes from Cuneo. Who are your drawing heroes besides Baskin and Kober?
My drawing heroes.
You had big influences. You also mentioned a professor when you were at
Jim Spanfellow.
Yeah, so besides that Holy Trinity, as we called them back then.
That's right. Well, Egon Schiele, for sure. I mean, you know, is a drawing hero to, you know, to I think just about anybody who loves drawing. Let's see. I mean, Albrecht Dürer was somebody I really looked at a lot when I was in college and in the early years, as well as Rembrandt.
For the etchings as opposed to the paintings?
The etchings primarily. And with Dürer, it's, you know, engravings and etchings and woodcuts. And Picasso, much more recently for me, has become, you know, a big source of inspiration. His later work, his etchings, his late period etchings, but also the etchings that he did in the 30s. You know, some with the bullfights and things. I've come to really appreciate his. I think it's the abandon, the freedom that the older I get, it's the thing that I crave the most. Yeah. And I'm working towards that. You know, I don't know if I'll get there, you know, but that's the thing I like the most, you know, in my work when I feel I've achieved it. But it's not easy to free yourself of everything else and just draw without.
It's a question we sort of got around last time as to whether drawing is always a struggle or not. Do you feel joy during the process, or is it something you have to...
I rarely feel joy.
In general, I know, but do you feel a sense of, I nailed that when you're drawing it, or is it more afterwards you have to look back and... Okay.
I know it when it happens. When it's happening, I know it, I feel it. But that's so rare. It's so elusive. And that's what keeps you going, because that's what I'm striving for. I hope I can get to that place again, because it happens so infrequently. Now, maybe I'm not drawing enough, but it's just and in a way, I mean, sometimes that can keep me from drawing too. You know, I mean, procrastination is always something to.
Well, anxiety can feed procrastination.
Yeah. And the fear that I'm
not that I know anything about that. So I go. The fear that I'm not gonna reach that I'm not gonna hit that spot. I'm not gonna get to that point where I really feel things are gelling, you know, and it's very disappointing not to, and it brings up all the insecurities of, you know, just not being good enough and not working hard enough, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's the pursuit of that sense of freedom in the drawing. That's what I see in Picasso's work, particularly his late period etchings, which he just did, you know, profusely. I mean, he just churned out these things. I don't know, you know, several a day, I think, and it was just amazing. He had, you know, his assistants leaving prepared plates all around his studio for him, so wherever he was, he could just, you know, knock something out. But yeah, so that's somebody getting around to you know, answering that question. That's. But every question leads to more questions.
Drawing, I admire.
In relation to that, when you were working on personal drawings for this collection, did that differ in process than when you were working on a professional piece? Were there aspects of drawing your spaghetti journal when you were drawing it that felt different at all from this is what I'm doing for the New York Times?
From an assignment, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Anytime I do a drawing for myself, it's very different from how I approach an assignment.
But does it reach that freedom?
Some of them did.
Is it more likely to, I guess, than, you know,
an
assignment? Okay.
Oh, an assignment, I don't expect to get to that point.
Okay. That's what I mean,
I don't. It's nice if it happens.
It's a byproduct,
but
though. Yeah.
There are too many restraints on me, and maybe self-imposed. I'm kind of anticipating that the client has some certain expectations from me, and there's a deadline, and I don't expect, and I don't have the luxury to wait around for that, to draw endlessly and wait for that kind of magic to happen. Because, you know, but when I'm working for myself, yeah, it's a whole different thing, you know. Because then I'm drawing directly with pen, and that's when these kind of magical sort of things can happen, that happy accidents, or, you know, the chaos, the out of chaos. What's the phrase? There's a great quote by Orson Welles that, of course, I can't remember right now.
I'll look it up. I'll put it in the show notes.
I have it written down in my notebook, but.
Yeah, all I've got is that Rilke line that you must change your life. That's pretty much all I keep over my desk. But I assume for normal people, you know, there's things that are a little more inspiring. And just another question from Cuneo. Who do you like more, him or Barry? I'm just kidding.
Well, John's got to learn to be able to make the hat come off his head the way Barry did in his Facebook post looking at my book, and then...
It's a fantastic book. I've only read it as a PDF so far, so I'm really happy to have a print version. And like I said, I'm going to buy a stack of them, so we'll get other people too also.
Thank you very much.
Joe, thanks so much for coming on.
That was great. Thanks, Gil.
And that was Joe Ciardiello. His new book is A Fistful of Drawings from Fantagraphics Underground. And it's an amazing piece of work. I tried to get that across in the introduction. I hope I kind of expressed that well enough, and that Joe expressed what the book is during our conversation. I can't say enough about how good this book is, and I hope you get to read it and just revel in the illustrations and get carried along in the story and this new understanding of the Italian-American experience, spaghetti westerns, that intersection of cultures. Joe brings it all together so well. Now, you can check out Joe's work, his portfolio, his blog, and appearances over at his website, joeciardiello.com, which we now have to spell out. JoeCiardiello. If you screw that up, search for A Fistful of Drawings, and you're sure to find links back to Joe's site, or at least the correct spelling of his name. He's also on Twitter as Joe Ciardiello 1 and on Instagram as Joe Ciardiello, all one word. Joe is one of my favorite illustrators, and I really think this book deserves a big audience, so I hope you give it a read. And if you're listening to this in near real time, Joe is, as I mentioned at the top, going to do a panel at the Society of Illustrators in New York City on February 28th, 2019, with his peer, Steve Brodner. I probably won't be able to attend because I have a client meeting in Princeton that afternoon, but it promises to be a good conversation. After we wrapped, I asked Joe, so, who you reading? If you want to hear his answer to that and get some extra conversation, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. I recently posted the fourth quarter episode featuring book recommendations and some extra conversation with Eddie Campbell, Nora Krug, Jason Lutz, Summer Pierre, David Small, Mark Derry, Michael Gerber, Angela Himsel, Kathy B. Graham, Shahar Pinsker, and Bill Cardilopoulos. You can support the Virtual Memories show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I have all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my secret project that I know I'm not going to make any progress on this month, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this episode at Joe's home in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. No tolls, so it was just gas money. But my wife came along, and we had dinner with Joe and his wife, the painter Susan Bluebow, after we finished the podcast. So it was all part of a nice evening. Still, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, coffee, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Special thanks go out to Nick Bartosik, Michael Hacker, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Jack Lescamella, Teresa Lewis, Stephen Nadler, Jim Ottaviani, Payne Prophet, Dmitry Samarov, Stephen Solomon, Craig P. Steffen, Greg Tanner, Ford Thomas, and Garrett Zecker for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We got the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. Check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with cartoonist James Sturm, author of the new graphic novel Off Season. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk about it on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to help us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.